Good morning, Jody.
Morning, Miss Robin. How are ye?
I'm good. And I want to welcome everybody to the Special Agent Moms podcast. And it's springtime in Kansas. I'm claiming that it's springtime. Um, the weather has taught us in the last couple of weeks that it can yo-yo, but it's spring. So um we have a guest with us, but let's introduce ourselves first. I'm Robin Eubank Callis, and I'm a K-State Research and Extension Agent in Barber County.
Good morning. It is springtime. Did you see my chicks video I put on my Facebook page? They're so stinking cute. Okay. Yes, and I'm Jody Drake. I'm the K-State Research and Extension Agent in Pratt County, Kansas. And I do get a little crazy about my baby chickens. If you haven't listened to our previous podcast about chickens, you should really go back and listen to that because it's my favorite one so far. Today's might replace it because one of my favorite people is on with us today, and that would be Katie Buhler. She is a former Pratt County 4-H'er, currently about to finish up her master's degree at Kansas State University. Yay! She has done many things since leaving Pratt County, though. She has taught fourth grade in Wamego. Is that right?
Yes, right down the road from Manhattan.
Yes. I will let Katie introduce herself and let her tell you all about the things she has done since leaving Pratt County 4-H.
All right. Well, yeah, I don't know that I could top the Beautiful Chickens and Chicks podcast from last week. That was absolutely fantastic. So, if you're listening in, definitely go check it out because it's a hoot to hear. But like Jody said, my name is Katie Buhler. I am a former Pratt County 4-H'er, one of my favorite identities to hold and what has really led me to a lot of where I'm at today. I went to K-State for my undergraduate degree and graduated from there in 2020 with my degree in elementary education. I spent 3 years teaching fourth grade in Wamego and spending significant chunks of time with 10-year-olds that I absolutely loved. They are some of the most curious humans you will ever meet. So if you get a chance,
Yes.
definitely invest some time in them. And then I chose to come back to K-State to pursue my master's 2 years ago. And that's where I'm currently finishing up my master's degree in curriculum and instruction, which is within the sphere of education. And I'll have my reading specialist license as well. And so that's kind of my education journey. And I'm starting the job hunt as I look towards the future as well. But while I've been back at K-State as a full-time student, I've also worked as a graduate assistant with the K-State Strengths Initiative that's based out of the Staley School of Leadership. And that was really a place that I found home at when I went to K-State as an undergrad. And I think what led me to that place in the first place was my involvement with 4-H and really getting involved with many different civic opportunities, with leadership experiences. And so that was just kind of a natural segue when I was starting my first college hunt. And that was a space that I developed a lot of powerful relationships that then drew me back and made me want to continue working as the K-State Strengths Graduate Assistant, where I now get to experience education instead of with 10-year-olds. I'm with 18 to 22, 26-year-olds, and getting to teach in a collegiate level classroom and see what that life is like, what education looks like from that sphere, and also get to work with some amazing students and strengths peer coaches. When we say strengths, that does not mean muscle strengths, though I know that I look like someone who is absolutely just a bodybuilder. K-State Strengths is focused on helping students identify their top 5 strengths using the Clifton Strengths Assessment. And then from there, we have student peer coaches who I get to collaborate with and work with every day to help increase student engagement and well-being on campus. And so that's been a place where I have really felt able to thrive because of the opportunity to continue supporting students as they develop as leaders, as they develop their capacity to coach one another, and as they develop their own strengths and look towards how they can apply those in their lives and as they work with teams.
Wowie.
That was kind of a long-winded introduction. You can tell that I love what I do. So
You do. You're very passionate about it. And I think that's amazing. All the things you've done since leaving Pratt County 4-H. What was your favorite 4-H project when you were in 4-H?
Oh, It would be a toss-up. It kinda depends, like, what time of year it is, what project I'm working on within the projects, right? I always say I did about every project that I could outside of animals. So, um, I would
Mhm.
say that leadership and citizenship were my favorite, probably experiential projects because they really enabled me to build the skills that I then leveraged for the rest of my life up to now. And they gave me the opportunity to connect with community first.
Mhm.
The project in terms of just, like, more personal learning and experiences, probably clothing and textiles and fiber arts, because that's really where I kind of started as a 4-H'er. That was my first project that I enrolled in, and that has been kind of a hobby transformed into a passion that I've also continued with, and has then enabled me to get connected with a lot of really neat fiber arts and clothing and textile communities across the state and even our nation too.
Katie, I'm curious. You say that was your first project. Do you remember what the first thing you made was when you started sewing?
Ooh, when I started sewing or when I started 4-H?
Okay. So yeah, when you your first 4-H project.
Okay, I always have to ask that because my mom had me behind a sewing machine before I could reach the foot pedal. So I've got pictures like age 1.5 helping pick out like the fabrics for my first baby quilt that she made me. And so that's kind of like I was initiated into the sewing world before I knew what sewing was. But my first 4-H project, let me think back here. Um, I made, let's see here. I had a couple. So my first clothing project was an apron. It was just a little, like, tie
Mhm.
apron around your waist. I made it out of pink and green 1930s-esque
Mhm.
fabric. So just simple gathering, but my grandmother, my mom's mom, actually helped me make that because I always spent a week in the summer at her house, and so we did lots of sewing projects together as well, and she's the one who taught my mom how to sew, and my mom was probably my main mentor in doing that. And then the other project I kind of worked on in tandem with that was a doll bed quilt. And so I got a sewing experience and I got a quilting experience. And my mom helped me make that very first doll bed quilt to get to sew for 4-H. So very fun.
I always love hearing people talk about their very first project. And a lot of times it's an apron, exactly like what you
Hmm.
mentioned there. But you know, the passion, that very first, it's you can't replace that.
No, and that's like I can see the picture of me finishing it and holding it up and just being so proud. I remember exactly how I modeled it when I modeled it in the fashion review and I carried like a bowl and a whisk with me. So those are such fun memories.
So many times when people think 4-H, they think cows and cookies. They think you
Mhm.
have to have an animal to be in 4-H, or you have to um, know someone with livestock, and that's why I love visiting with 4-Hers like you who thrive, who have gotten so much out of 4-H beyond the livestock, and actually really got just as much, if not more, out of 4-H. Because you were also on state 4-H council. You traveled to some of the state 4-H events, and really thrived on a state and national level as well. So that's why I love visiting with you about your 4-H experience because it really did not involve livestock at all, and I think that's great. I think kids need to hear that. I think our city
Mhm.
kids need to hear that as well.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I know, like, being back at K-State also has really kind of given me that context as well. I
Mhm.
hear a lot of students speak to the power of their 4-H experience, which is really exciting thinking about the ongoing investment in the 4-H program that I'm hearing as students are coming into our programs at K-State and continuing to see a lot of value in that.
Mhm.
And I often hear a lot of livestock stories still. And so when we get those opportunities to plug in and say, hey, what other projects did you do so that other students in the classroom space also are able to recognize, like, hey, 4-H, they did more than just the animals is always fun. So I'm glad I had that context so I can ask some of those questions too to elevate the experiences. And I always like to tell my students, like, the closest that I got to animals was learning how to like move bucket caps in the bucket cap show at the Pratt County Fair. And while that was fun, I gained a lot of other skills that really added value to my ongoing development, so
Right. Right. Now you recently were back in Pratt, doing a project at our Vernon Philly Art Museum. And this was a result of another competition you competed in a lot, and that was the Make It with Wool competition. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what it is?
Yes, absolutely. So, as we think about kind of involvement with 4 H, Make It with Wool was always something I saw as kind of in tandem with 4 H. So,
Okay.
not actually affiliated at all, but many times we saw a lot of crossover. So, Make It with Wool is a separate contest from 4 H that allows seamstresses and fiber artists who do knitting, crocheting, anything of that sort to create items, clothing, garments generally, and a few wearable accessories out of wool products, and they have to be at least 60% wool. And then you get the opportunity to compete. We used to have districts, now we just have a larger state contest, but you get to compete by having your garments that you've created judged for their construction as well as model them for their fit and their presence. And so then once you're judged, you get to then obviously be ranked, but they've got junior and senior categories. And whoever wins at the state level then gets to go on and compete at the national level. And I love the Make It with Wool contest, especially because it focuses on sewing with wool. And wool is a natural fiber, and it also is an extremely versatile fiber that I think sometimes gets painted as what you see when you think of like men's suits or your grandma's old plaid skirt. And we don't give it enough credit because there are so many new ways of working with wool that really create more sustainable environmental practices, decrease like climate impacts on our world. And so, Make It with Wool is also an organization that's not only focused on just sewing beautiful garments, it's focused on promoting and creating more sustainable systems that enhance the well-being of our world. And so that's kind of where I found my passion for wool over my involvement. I actually started sewing with wool when I was in 4th grade, and that was the earliest that I could compete in the preteen division of Make It with Wool. And I can continue to compete as an adult, but I competed. I think calculated up for over 15 years,
Wow.
and made wool garments that I was able to enter in the 4-H fashion review, but also was able to enter in Make It with Wool. So I always kind of got the double duty there. And the other facet of Make It with Wool that's so powerful is that we have a very, I would say, tight knit community of people that participate in it. And so when I started in 4th grade, I'm still really good friends with participants that I continue to compete with. And so being together every year, it's kind of like a family reunion of people coming together and just being creative together.
That is so fun. Now, does it have to be, can it be alpaca wool? Can it be lamb's wool? Can it be any type of wool?
Funny you should ask. It can be any type of wool as long as
Okay.
your garment is like at least 60%. So as long as the fabric is at least 60% wool. I remember like 2 or 3 years into competing in the state contest, I walked into a room one year and one of my judges asked me the question, what's like a type of animal that produces wool or a breed of sheep that produces wool? And I just knew wool came from sheep. I had no idea about it. And I'm like, if that judge could have taken a picture of my face, I probably would have just been like, "Oh, I'm going to get last place because I don't know the breeds of sheep." So I guess that was a hindrance. And by golly, I went out and researched different breeds of sheep. But yeah, wool can come from sheep, llamas, alpacas, goats, Angora rabbits. So there's many different types. Not a required type that you use as long as your wool is at least 60% wool.
So you went from not knowing your breeds of sheep clear to being the national ambassador for this
Yes,
program last year. Fantastic.
absolutely. So, lots of learning along the way, that's for sure. So,
Mhm.
like, probably 6th grade Katie went and researched the breeds of sheep, 1. But after competing for many years, I kinda took a break from competing and served as a judge for a few years when I was in college for our contest. And the
Oh,
past
okay.
2 years, I was like, I still love sewing. I finally got some time and capacity in my schedule, so I decided to go ahead and try to use up a little bit more of the fabric that has grown in my very large collection of my wool stash now and make a
You-
few more
Because
garments.
you get a
So,
piece of fabric for a prize, don't you?
yes, every
When
time
you
you
win. Okay.
compete,
Yeah.
you get to that's kind of like your everybody gets a new piece of fabric to use then intended for the next year, but I've kind of collected over the years. So, yep, but that's also really nice because it is hard to find wool fabric. And we can touch on that too. But I competed, decided to go back the past 2 years and compete, and I won our senior division at the state level both of those years. So I was able to compete at the national contest. And so I guess that would have been early 2024. I competed at nationals and ended up winning the national contest. At the national contest, you have representatives, one in the junior division, one in the senior division, and one in the adult division, who all compete. And there was about 30 states who sent representatives in each division. And so I got to compete with amazing, amazing creative people from all across the United States who'd made beautiful wool garments. And I was privileged enough to get to win last year, so I've been serving as the National Make It with Wool ambassador up until just a couple of months ago when I passed my title on to Henry in Minnesota. So Henry is our new ambassador for this coming year. But I learned so much through that process, just more about the wool industry. Make It with Wool is sponsored by the National American Sheep Industry. And so we are part of their kind of larger conference when we compete at the national level. So it's just enabled me to get to know a lot more about sheep producers and where we get wool from. So, like the shirt that I'm wearing is wool today, and how do we go from the sheep to the clothing that I'm making? And that was the background that I didn't necessarily have. So this past year has been a great learning opportunity for me, and also a chance to then just share more about how we sew with wool garments, but also how we create other things and do fiber arts with wool garments too.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, Robin, we are in charge of the fiber arts department at the state fair. What are some of the things that we see at the state fair?
Oh, yeah.
So we see a whole variety. I mean, the largest number of entries by far is in the quilting area,
Mhm,
which falls
mhm.
under fiber arts. But we do have spinning and we have some weaving that comes in every year. And that's where we see a lot of our wool entries. We also have seen a resurgence in felting. And
Yeah.
so I'm really excited that yeah, our rules had been 90% wool, and we recently aligned with the 60% so that maybe we give a special wool award every year as well at the state fair. And but I loved your phrase, I'm gonna steal it. They're fiber artists. We've been calling
Yes.
it fiber arts for years, but I had thought about calling them fiber artist. And because it really is. Because we always find something that's just a little different, a little intriguing. You know, cross stitch, any sort of needle arts is all in that area. And yeah. Jody, do you have I have a suspicion I know what your favorite is, but do you
Ooh.
have a favorite that we have at the state fair?
I really like the felting projects.
Mhm,
Um, but I think a lot of people don't know what felting is.
mhm.
And Katie, do you want to describe that for us and tell a little bit about
Yeah,
the project that you did at our local art museum a few
for
weeks
sure.
ago?
Yes, and Robin, like you said, when we think about felting, that's where I think I really started to recognize the artistry in working with
Uh-huh.
fibers beyond just sewing, right? Because felting, in when you just think about what that means, most people would think about it when you have like a wool sweater and you accidentally put it in the washing machine and then it shrinks down to like the size of a doll. So that's essentially felting. But there's many ways you can go about it in much more artistic ways, right, than just throwing a wool sweater in. And felting happens either through the wet felting process or the needle felting process. So when we think about wet felting, that involves agitation and heat and moisture. So you get wool fibers damp, it expands them because they're protein fibers that have like microscopic scales on them. And so when those then expand and then they're agitated together because they're moist, they've expanded, they're being agitated by being tumbled in maybe a washing machine. When you're a fiber artist in wet felting, you're usually like rolling it or rubbing wool together with like plastic wrap or bubble wrap that provides some agitation of the fibers. It allows those protein scales to interlock with each other. And so they then shrink into one another. And when you add a little bit of heat, whether that's warm water, a little bit of warm air, and continue that agitation, which also generates heat, it allows them to all felt. So the fibers latch together, they shrink into one another, and that kind of creates then your felt. So that's what's happening in your washing machine with wool, but we do it more intentionally with wet felting as an art form too. And so I've learned a little bit about it. It's still a kind of new area of experimentation, but our former state Make It With Wool director, Deb Gordon, who's been a huge wool advocate for many years, actually kind of taught me that initial process. And I learned it actually, I can't, Deb taught me a lot more about it, but my very first exposure to wet felting was actually at Kansas 4 H Discovery Days as a high school student. And I cannot remember my presenter's name. I think it was Abraham and I can't remember his last name, but I got to take a class at Discovery Days where I did my very first wool felted pot holder coaster, and I still have it literally sitting over here on my dresser too. Um, but that was wet felting. So that's one way of felting with wool. And I've made a couple of like really warm, cozy scarves that are wet felted. You can kind of take different colors of wool and place them on your objects so you get these really neat kind of abstract pieces.
Huh.
You can also wet felt with silk because that's also a natural fiber. And so you can kind of interweave those. So lots of beautiful things you can create. But then the other facet of felting is needle felting. And that's what I think most people think of when they're doing
Mhm.
more kind of the artistic side of felting.
Yes. Yeah.
Needle felting only requires the agitation piece. So you literally just have a piece of wool background fabric. And I just say pick out a picture that you really like, and you've got wool roving, which is the wool off of a sheep that's been carded, it's been cleaned, it's been usually dyed, but it hasn't been spun into yarn yet. And you just pull off small pieces and then you start creating a scene, starting with like the back of the picture that you're felting and putting it on your piece of wool and then using a needle. And that needle has little barbs on the end of it. And when you poke that roving into the background piece that you have, it then allows those fibers to interlock with the wool fabric. Usually you have a block of foam behind that fabric, so you've got something to poke into, and it latches them all together so that then you're able to start blending these beautiful roving fibers into the image that you're creating. And so that's been a really fun piece of learning. I got to facilitate a class at Discovery Days this past year on how to felt. I saw a couple of those, I think, at the state fair when I was there this year. And that's what I got to facilitate a class on at our local art museum too. So lots of learning there.
That is so fun. I had no idea about the wet felting. Now, the dry felting, I think, is probably what we see the most of at our state
Definitely.
fair.
Mhm.
Um, Come in and we get some really interesting, beautiful pieces, very creative
Mhm.
pieces come in to the state fair. Wouldn't you say so, Robin?
Yeah,
That it's
I
mostly the
would.
dry felting. Yeah.
It
Yes.
always reminds me a lot of, like I always say it's kind of like watercoloring with
Yes.
fibers, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
gonna be like this perfect crisp picture, but you can get it very detailed, and so it's just like
Yeah.
creating a picture by weaving together the different colors of roving, and so just beautiful things that can emerge.
Yeah. They are beautiful. Yeah, they really are. And just real quick, for anyone that's listening that doesn't know what our discovery days are,
Oh,
Bridge
yeah.
Discovery Days are for our youth that are, oh, is it 13 and older? Yeah, youth 13 and older. We do this at the very beginning of our summer, and it's held on campus at Kansas State University for about 3 days, I believe. And it's just kind of a mini college experience for our kids. They get to have some classes on campus, they get to stay in the dorms. And we just kind of offer 'em a variety of different short classes on a variety of different subjects. And it's just a fun time for the kids to be on campus. They get to eat in the dining hall and just kind of a fun time. So a little off topic, but just kind of
No,
wanted
it's
to
spot
explain
on.
what discovery days was. Now, Katie, I'm glad you pointed out that what you're wearing is made out of wool. I do have some short sleeve t-shirts, kind of active wear that's made out of wool too, because they're really good at wicking
Mhm.
moisture away from your body. Um, Tell us a little bit about the care for wool products or products that have wool. Like, how would
Yeah.
you wash what you're wearing?
For sure. So, like I said before, like a lot of people have the misconception that wool's only made into men's suits or the big
Hmm.
plaid skirts, and you have to dry clean it to get anything cleaned. I will validate, yes, a lot of wool still has to be dry cleaned because dry cleaning prevents your wool clothing from being felted. So most wool garments that even I've made today still need to be either spot cleaned. I do a lot of my own kind of hand washing and spot cleaning
Mhm.
just because I don't have a dry cleaner that's near me. But there are many new wools that are evolving, like the one that I'm wearing. So this is actually called a superwash merino wool. It's 100% wool knit from New Zealand. And you can see it's like a stretch knit. It doesn't have to be lined because it's so soft and very, very comfortable. This is what a lot of the activewear, hiking clothing, socks that people wear are made out of. And so that is kind of a new emerging type of wool. And when I say super wash, that means that this wool can be thrown in my washer at home, washed on a cold water cycle, and then hung to dry, and it's ready to wear again. And so the fact that we're now evolving and creating garments that are wearable at home with wool, that are comfortable, that are soft, and that are usable in your day to day life is really, really powerful. I think the other really neat thing about why we see so much activewear made out of wool is because what you said, Jody, it's water wicking. So it wicks
Yeah.
away sweat and it actually traps the water in the protein fibers of the wool so that you don't feel damp or sticky after you've been through a workout or after you've been hiking. And I think the other cool thing is that also locks away odor. And so that's why when you like have to dry clean wool garments, generally, you don't have to dry clean them after every wear because it locks in the odor in the fibers and doesn't release those so your clothes don't smell stinky, even if you've sweat in them some. You can continue to rewear and reduce the amount of times you have to wash your garment. And so that's been really, really neat. And you're starting to see a lot more of washable wools emerging in our just kind of like sector and in the wool products that are available. So that's what I've really been exploring as I'm sewing more of too, is just the comfort that is emerging in wool.
So how is sewing with wool different than sewing with like a cotton polyester blend fabric?
There's not a ton of difference, I would say, in terms of the actual sewing process. So I think we've got yes.
I think we have a visitor.
Heck yeah.
Heck
That's
yeah. Hey,
awesome.
Brady.
We love it. We love it.
We
But
love
when
it.
we think about the sewing process, then we still use a regular sewing machine. Generally, you want like a good sharp needle. W- Sewing with wool knit is about like sewing with any other knit that you would use. Sometimes I use a jersey needle and a good stretch stitch so that your seams don't pop. The thing that you do want to consider when sewing with wool garments that might be more out of just a woven wool is that generally those are going to be lined garments. So you've got to
Mm,
insert a lining with them, whereas with most cotton garments, you don't. Um, Linings, I say flexibly because that's kind of like a standard issue with just wool in general. And that's kind of just more of a societal thing. There's so many wools that are being produced now that are well refined and are so soft that you wouldn't necessarily have to have a lining. Originally, a lot of wools were lined because they were a scratchier fiber because we didn't have the excellent like carding and refining processes that are now available. So we're able to create very soft wools. When you think about some even like Pendleton woolen shirts, especially for men, you'll see those and those aren't lined now because they're a soft enough fiber.
mhm.
But generally, when you're sewing with wool, you do insert a lining into the garment, and that can be a challenge because there's not a lot of patterns out there today that are made with linings. I often sew with Vogue patterns because those are more likely to have a lining, not always, but sometimes. And then when you think about sewing with wool, you also have to consider it is a woven fiber, so it's going to have some flexibility in its movement. So how you interface is really important. And I think the thing you have to consider probably most is how you press your garments, because when you're pressing wool, it's very easy to if you expose it to too much heat, it starts the felting process because it can get kind of like a sheen on it if you put a direct iron onto it. So you usually have to use a press cloth if you don't have like a kind of shell on your iron. My mom and I luckily invested in a nice iron that has kind of we call it a shoe on it. So you can press without a press cloth on wool. But that is a nice tool to be able to use. And often we've got more tailored garments. And so you've got to have like maybe a tailor's ham, which is not an Easter ham, but a piece or what do I want to call it? Basically a big round of fabric that's stuffed with sawdust that you can shape your garment on, and be able to press darts and seams as well. So pressing is probably the biggest difference in sewing with wool.
That that's exactly what we needed to know. Hey, Robin, do you want to introduce your special guest?
Yes, please.
I guess I am.
No.
Okay.
And now he
So
gets
that
shy.
he did. So it is spring break when we're recording this. And so it became a Brady goes to work with mommy day. So um
This is why we're called the Special Agent Mom podcast.
I put the
Hello.
mom in the episode today for sure.
I love this. And Robin, is Brady going to be in 4-H pretty soon too?
So he's done some clover bud activities already. He has got another 2 years, year and a half now before he can join as a
Mhm.
member. So
Mhm.
we're in kindergarten, so we're getting started, but he knows he will, and he's even asked, when can I join 4-H? So
Mhm.
I guess we're looking at the 4-H alumni and the future a little bit today. So
Absolutely. To work with fiber arts, I think one of my favorite opportunities to work with young 4-Hers and clover buds and people just kind of exploring what projects might I want to enroll in? What do I want to try out? Is getting to facilitate workshops because the felting process, like I mentioned, is something that you can do from a very young age. So at my most recent workshop, we had kids that were probably 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old that were
Oh,
there
fun.
felting with their family. And so it's really accessible to just about anyone who wants to try it out. And it's very forgiving. So unlike maybe like an oil painting or a watercolor, once you put the dye on there, it's there. You can pull the felt out, you can readjust, overlap, and so it makes creating a lot less stressful and just very flexible. And so I think that for felting is really cool, but I've also gotten to then work with young 4-Hers who are interested in learning to sew. And while we don't usually initially maybe start with a wool project, it might be the cotton apron or something. Couple years into the project, it's a great avenue to just start exploring what can it look like to work with some different types of fabric because it's a
Huh?
great learning experience and it makes clothes that even with kids who probably have some wear and tear on their garments, wool is a sturdy fiber, so those tend to last a little longer too.
Yeah, absolutely. You
Mhm.
bet.
but you keep talking
Katie,
about wool garments, and I have to think about my husband's wool socks.
Oh yeah.
Um,
oh
they
yeah.
they come out in the winter every year, and they, you know, last forever as long as we don't lose them. So
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And wool socks, they're I would say one of my like most prized possessions, especially in the wintertime, right? Because again, like water wicking, they're warm, so they provide that. But wool also doesn't have to be hot, so they allow breathability, which I think is really nice, especially in socks. And generally, those are made out of wool that you can throw in the washing machine, and even if they felt a little, those socks are still gonna fit. So yeah, I wash and even dry my wool socks very often.
I did have a small come apart when I saw Carrie wearing my wool socks this winter.
Ooh, yeah.
If you know, you know.
I don't share those ones.
No, I don't share them either. Yeah, she had to take them off immediately because
Mhm, mhm.
I've got like one really good pair that have lasted me since college, and they're my really warm, fuzzy ones. And it got stinking cold this winter,
You
you
needed
know,
them.
below
Mhm.
zero, and I needed them. She did not. She was not going outside taking care of my chickens.
Yeah,
I
and you
was.
need those in the chicken coop for sure,
Yeah,
so
exactly. So
yes.
anyway, I digress. I digress. Katie, you have shared a wealth of knowledge about wool, and I can't tell you thank you enough for being with us today and sharing all that knowledge. Can you this might be a loaded question, but um, maybe share with us kind of your future plans. And I hope you'll say that you always plan to be involved in 4-H in some way, shape, or form, especially in Pratt County 4-H. And so wherever you go, wherever life leads you, just kind of share with us some of your future plans.
Yes, well, that was gonna be my lead in. Yes, I will think I will always stay involved with 4-H. That's definitely it was a core experience throughout my development throughout my childhood, and is something that I feel very committed to, in a community that I've been so privileged to be able to remain connected with through my involvement at K-State and local 4-H clubs in Riley County now. Just getting to continue to share my passion for the many projects I was involved with is top of the priority list when I think about life beyond education. And really, being a teacher, 4-H provides so many of those foundational opportunities to just continue learning. And so I think that's a space that will always remain involved and engaged with. When I think about more like professional, actually having to do the work and make the money, I'll be graduating in May and I'm starting my job hunt in the field of education as well. So I'm still defining kind of what that's going to look like. I've started looking in the K-12 sphere as well as in higher education, because those are both pathways that provide really viable opportunities to continue working with students in their development, or to continue working with teachers in terms of their professional development as well. So kind of an emerging field in the realm of education is called instructional coaching, which provides opportunities to engage with teachers in K-12 school districts to provide ongoing professional development, observation, feedback, mentorship experiences. And that's something I'm really interested in continuing to invest in teachers who are giving so much of their time and effort into supporting students, and making sure that schools are also set up to support those educators in the work that they're doing is something I'm really passionate about. So that's kind of one facet of the field, but I never want to lose touch with students either, because they're the ones that bring so much life and curiosity to the work that we do. They're the reason that we're here as educators, and you all know that because you've got students as well as
Mhm.
AX educators, as 4-H agents, as ag agents. Our communities are the learning spaces that we need to enable people to thrive in. And so that's something that I also care deeply about and look forward to continuing to pursue as I look at where I'll be working in terms of career pathways, as well as how I can continue to engage community members in learning. So,
Well, you, Katie, are exactly why we do what we do. So you are exactly right. You are exactly why we invest our time, because working with youth is exactly, wouldn't you agree, Robin, why we do what we do?
mhm, mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
and I love how she tied it all together. It's not just the youth, it's all the people in the communities.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And um being able to add that educational piece that can change lives.
for sure.
Um,
For sure. You're
so
never
And
too old to
yeah.
learn a new hobby, to learn a new skill. So,
yeah, and I know that sewing has been a big part of my girls'
mhm,
lives and probably always will be. Maddie, even at K-State, has found that her church has a sewing group, and it's mostly older ladies. But
mhm.
she called me the other day after meeting with the old lady church lady sewing group, and
Mhm.
was filled with so much joy because
Oh,
she had
yeah.
so much fun with them. They were, I don't remember what they're sewing. I think prayer squares is what they were
Oh,
sewing.
mhm, mhm,
And she was just had the best time.
mhm.
None of them are her age. She didn't care. She just had so much fun. So I'm sure sewing will always be a part of your chemical makeup as
Mhm.
well. So
Definitely, definitely.
yeah,
It unites people in a
it
shared
does.
passion. So,
Even if you don't know how to
mhm.
sew, you would
Exactly.
probably be welcomed in that church lady sewing group.
Exactly, exactly. Comes back to the relationship.
You know, they take you under your wing. I have some very avid quilters who took me
Huh?
under their wing when I started here, and if I don't get anything else done, I make one block a year for our quilt block contest.
Yeah.
And because sometimes in the busy world, that's all I get done in a year is the one block.
Mhm,
But even they will comment that how much my skills have improved through the years. And
mhm, mhm,
you know, I can hold up my one block and go, it was quality. I
mhm,
was, I passed all the requirements. And in the beginning it didn't necessarily, but it
Mhm.
was it's all a learning process, and they're avid teachers as well
mhm,
in the
for sure.
process.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I will kind of wrap us up here. If you need to find us, you can email us with ideas or comments. Robin's at reubank@ksu.edu. You can find me at jdrake@ksu.edu. We're both on Facebook, Barber County Extension on Facebook. You can look for Pratt CO Extension on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram at Pratt CO Extension. and on YouTube at Pratt County Extension. So give us a follow on Spotify and Apple to find the Special Agent Mom podcast. And I think that's it for today. Thanks so much for being here, Katie.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you all
thank
for
you.
welcoming me in.
Yeah.